Hello and welcome to Sunday Chat for the 8th Sunday in Ordinary Time, which happens to be March 3rd, which happens to be the Sunday right before Ash Wednesday. And so I'm doing some benevolent gazing, looking at myself in a mirror. The idea not being to see to see if I need a facelift or if I've grown any more wrinkles or grey hair. The idea is I'm looking to see if I can still see some semblance of the divine image in my reflection, because going into Lent, that's basically the challenge for each of us. It's not about being the best that we can be. It's not about becoming perfect. It's not about losing weight, though that would be nice, or getting firmer abs, though that would be really nice. But rather, the Lenten season is about seeing, first of all, to what extent that divine image, which I'm looking at right now, hopefully, is it still shining, or is there something obscuring it? Is there something in me that is causing distortion in the mirror, that the image of God no longer shines, but rather there is some kind of a distortion? And I talk about this in Sunday Bible Talk this week, but I thought I'd continue the same theme in the video because it's rather an interesting idea that somehow Lent should rather be a time for rediscovering that divine image with which we were all born, and seeing where it's gone if it's left us, or how to make it stronger if it's still there. Because Lent is not just about penitence for the sake of penitence, or Lenten disciplines for the sake of disciplines. If we're not about the business of becoming more spiritual and growing closer to God, then we're wasting our time. Lent is not about being perfectionists, but rather about being God's lovers. In other words, what is separating us from the love of God? And if it's anything in us, what are we going to do about it? So, St. Paul does say that nothing can separate us from the love of Christ, but to be realistic, we can be cut off from that divine image within ourselves and move into self-loathing, self-hatred, hatred of others, living a life that instead of being God-centered is centered on addictions or narcissism, is focused on bad habits, focused perhaps on sinful behaviors, and instead of drawing closer to God, instead of imaging the divine image, we rather distort it. So we need some honesty here. We need to be able to look in that mirror and basically claim, to what extent are we not living as spiritual beings, but rather living out of our earthly instincts? I love Teilhard de Chardin's words on this matter, so often quoted, the whole idea that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but rather we are spiritual beings having, the other way around, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, rather we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So in other words, primarily we are creatures of spirit, and that what's happening on earth is simply almost like a little detour, a little test, but our reality is to be that spiritual being. So we ourselves are the ones who cut ourselves off from that spiritual life. Nobody does it to us. Whatever happens in life, no matter how many tragedies we go through, no matter how many disasters befall us, no matter how many broken hearts we have, no matter how often we're cheated, betrayed, passed over for promotions, had major losses of one kind or another, nothing can cut us off from that spiritual life, from mirroring the image of God within, unless we allow it to. So I believe that Lent is a good time to examine our lives and see where we ourselves might be tarnishing that divine image. We were all made in the image and likeness of God. We were all gifted with the breath of the Divine One at our creation. So what is it in us that is cutting short that breath, making us breathless, reducing us to the valley of bones in Ezekiel 37, where we have bones but no flesh, no sinew, no heart? What is giving us a stony heart and taking away our hearts of flesh? Only we can answer that question. For some it may be bad habits, for others it may be attitudes that are the issue. For others, it may be a failure in trust, a failure in belief, a failure to surrender to God's love. And that is the most important thing that we can examine. What is it that is separating us from that divine image within and tarnishing that image? So instead of seeing it clearly and radiating the presence of God, we radiate a tarnished image in some cases, or no image at all in the worst case scenario. What is it that each of us must do to reclaim that image and to live as children of God? It's also, I think, a lesson for the church at this time. The church, like its people, her people, the church needs to look in that mirror fairly and squarely and see what it is that's tarnishing its reflection. How is the image of God distorted by the church? Of course, we have the answer partly in the paedophilia, not only paedophilia, but sexual abuse that spans not only children, but also includes the sexual abuse of nuns, the sexual abuse of laywomen, the sexual abuse of seminarians, the sexual abuse of teenagers, and then, of course, most heinous of all, the sexual abuse of children. So that, of course, is a distortion in the mirror of the church. And as members of the body of Christ, we cannot simply take care of our own tarnished image, but each of us needs to somehow work towards helping the church shine more in the years to come. This means holding the church accountable, number one. Number two, it means concretely doing something to raise up the institutional church. The doing something goes beyond reading all the titillating headlines and expressing shock and scandal over them. It involves more than walking out the door because everything is falling apart. It involves more than just weeping and feeling helpless, but it does involve being active. How can each of us not only repair our own image of the divine, but how can each of us contribute to helping the church repair her image from within? How can the light of Christ shine more visibly through the church, because the light of Christ has not been tarnished by sins of hierarchy or sins of abuse? And each of us then needs to be somehow accountable in this and assist the church in moving to penitence, and from penitence to reparation, and from reparation into being a new creation. So just as Lent calls each of us to reclaim the divine image within, so I believe this season of Lent in 2019 calls each of us to be a member of a church that is penitent and a member of a church that is moving towards reparation and transcendence. Each of us has a part to play, and only each of us can know what that part is going to be. So, on this note, I will say goodbye and leave you with your own mirrors to gaze into. Mine, fortunately, is a small mirror. Perhaps a larger mirror would be more useful. We can certainly see more faults the bigger the mirror is. Mine is rather contained. So find a big mirror, look in it carefully, see what it's telling you about the state of your soul and where it's inviting you to go. And also look at the church and what is the mirror telling you about the state of the church today and what you can do to repair the image that has been tarnished so badly for so long. Lenten blessings.